Human, is that a weapon between your legs? Drop your pants. The stern voice of Commander Craxon echoed through the bustling intergalactic spaceport, causing heads to turn and conversations to halt. Scott Webb, Earth's top diplomat, stood frozen in shock, his face flushing red as he realized the Klingon security officer was addressing him. The routine weapons screening had taken an unexpected turn. Scott's mind raced, trying to comprehend how he'd ended up in this predicament. He'd been en route to a crucial peace conference between Earth and the Klingon Empire, carrying the hopes of billions for improved interstellar relations. Now he found himself at the center of a potential diplomatic crisis, all because of his anatomy. Commander Craxon's piercing gaze bore into Scott as she motioned to the cylindrical shape clearly visible on the security scanner's display. Her hand rested on her disruptor, ready for any sudden moves. The tension in the air was palpable as other travelers watched the scene unfold, a mix of curiosity and concern on their alien faces. "I assure you, Commander, there's been a misunderstanding," Scott began, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. "What you're seeing is a natural part of human male anatomy. It's not a weapon." Craxon's ridged forehead furrowed in confusion and disbelief. "Impossible. No species carries such a large appendage. You will remove your lower garments for inspection immediately or face arrest for weapon smuggling." The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on Scott. Here he was, a seasoned diplomat, being ordered to strip in public by an attractive alien woman. Under different circumstances, it might have been the start of an interesting encounter. Now it threatened to unravel years of careful negotiations between their peoples. As word of the confrontation spread, a crowd began to gather. Humans looked on in a mix of embarrassment and amusement, while aliens of various species whispered among themselves, some snickering, others genuinely confused by human physiology. Scott stood his ground, keenly aware that his next actions could have far-reaching consequences. "Commander, I cannot comply with your request. It would be a violation of my personal dignity and an affront to Earth customs. Surely we can resolve this without resorting to such measures?" Craxon's eyes narrowed, a flicker of uncertainty passing across her features. She found herself strangely drawn to the human's defiance, a trait respected in Klingon culture. Yet her duty to security protocols warred with this unexpected attraction. As the standoff continued, news of the incident raced through diplomatic channels. Both Earth and Kronos buzzed with activity as officials scrambled to address the situation. The peace conference, meant to herald a new era of cooperation, now teetered on the brink of collapse before it had even begun. In the heart of the spaceport, surrounded by a sea of alien faces, Scott Webb and Commander Craxon locked eyes. Neither was willing to back down, yet both sensed the weight of the moment. Their actions in the next few minutes could either bridge the gap between their species or widen it into an unbridgeable chasm. The air crackled with tension, a pressure cooker of cultural misunderstandings and alien bureaucracy. And beneath it all, an undercurrent of unexpected attraction flowed between human and Klingon, adding yet another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. As higher authorities on both sides raced to intervene, Scott took a deep breath. He had to find a way to navigate this delicate situation, to maintain his dignity and Earth's interests while also addressing the Klingons' security concerns. The fate of human-Klingon relations hung in the balance, all because of a simple anatomical difference. Little did Scott know this embarrassing misunderstanding was about to become the catalyst for a series of events that would reshape the galactic political landscape and challenge everything he thought he knew about diplomacy, alien cultures, and even himself. As Scott Webb and Commander Craxon remained locked in their standoff, the tension in the spaceport reached a fever pitch. Suddenly, a commotion near the security checkpoint drew their attention. Admiral James Hawkins, Earth's ambassador to the Klingon Empire, strode purposefully through the crowd, his weathered face etched with concern. Beside him walked General Kava, his Klingon counterpart, her imposing presence parting the sea of onlookers. "What in the name of the Federation is going on here?" Admiral Hawkins demanded, his voice cutting through the din of murmurs and whispers. Commander Craxon snapped to attention, her eyes never leaving Scott. "Admiral, We've detected a potential weapon on this human. He refuses to submit to a thorough inspection. General Kava's eyes narrowed as she assessed the situation. Commander Craxton, explain yourself. This human is a diplomat, not a common criminal. As Craxton began to detail her suspicions, Scott felt a mix of relief and embarrassment wash over him. The arrival of high-ranking officials from both sides offered a potential way out of this mess, but it also meant the incident was escalating far beyond what he'd imagined. Admiral Hawkins listened to Craxton's explanation, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. He turned to Scott, raising an eyebrow. Mr. Webb, I believe we have a rather unique situation on our hands. Scott nodded, his face still flushed. Indeed, Admiral. I've been trying to explain that what Commander Craxton sees is simply part of human male anatomy. The Admiral pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling slowly. He turned to General Kava and began a hushed conversation, gesticulating as he attempted to explain human physiology without further inflaming the situation. As the two leaders conferred, Scott noticed a flurry of activity above them. News drones hovered near the ceiling, their lenses focused on the unfolding drama. He groaned inwardly, realizing that this embarrassing misunderstanding was now being broadcast across the galaxy. Commander Craxton, still unconvinced, maintained her rigid stance. With all due respect, Admiral, I cannot simply take your word for it. Our security protocols are clear. Before Admiral Hawkins could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. Perhaps I can be of assistance. All eyes turned to see a woman in a lab coat pushing her way through the crowd. She was accompanied by a small team of humans, each wearing the insignia of a nearby research station. Dr. Elena Petrova, xenobiologist, she introduced herself, her crisp accent hinting at her Russian heritage. I believe I have a solution that can satisfy both parties without compromising anyone's dignity. Admiral Hawkins nodded, relief evident on his face. Dr. Petrova, your timing is impeccable. What do you propose? The scientist held up a sleek handheld device. This is a non-invasive bioscanner. It can provide a detailed analysis of Mr. Webb's anatomy without requiring him to remove any clothing. If Commander Craxton agrees, we can prove definitively that what she's seeing is not a weapon. General Kavag turned to Craxton. Commander, this seems a reasonable compromise. Do you concur? Craxton hesitated, her eyes darting between the scanner and Scott. Finally, curiosity won out over suspicion. Very well, proceed with the scan. As Dr. Petrova approached, Scott felt a mix of relief and trepidation. He stood still as she ran the device over his body, acutely aware of Commander Craxton's intense gaze. For a moment, their eyes met, and Scott was surprised to see a flicker of something beyond professional interest in the Klingon's expression. Scan complete, Dr. Petrova announced. She tapped the device, projecting a holographic display of Scott's internal anatomy. As you can see, Commander, what you detected is indeed a natural part of human male physiology. There are no weapons or hidden devices of any kind. Craxton leaned in, studying the hologram with fascination. Her proximity to Scott sent an unexpected shiver down his spine. He caught a whiff of her scent, a mix of leather and something alien, yet oddly alluring. Remarkable, Craxton murmured, her voice softer than before. She looked up at Scott, seeing him in a new light. I apologize for the misunderstanding, Mr. Webb. Your species is more intriguing than I realized. Scott felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with embarrassment. No harm done, Commander. I'm glad we could clear things up. As the tension in the immediate vicinity began to dissipate, Admiral Hawkins and General Kava moved to address the larger implications of the incident. They huddled with their aides, discussing how to spin this potential diplomatic disaster into an opportunity for cultural exchange. However, their plans were abruptly interrupted by a commotion at the far end of the spaceport. A group of humans, their faces contorted with anger, pushed their way through the security barriers. Earth for humans! No more alien interference! Their shouts echoed through the terminal, drawing all eyes to their approach. At the head of the group strode a man in a modified Earth military uniform, his eyes blazing with zealotry. I am Captain Marcus Steele, he announced, his voice carrying across the shocked crowd, And we of Earth First demand an end to this mockery of human dignity. Scott tensed, recognizing the dangerous situation unfolding before them. He glanced at Commander Craxon, seeing her hand instinctively move towards her weapon. In that moment, he realized that the peace they had just brokered was once again hanging by a thread. As Captain Steele and his followers advanced, Scott knew that his actions in the next few moments could determine the future of human-Klingon relations. The incident that had begun as a personal embarrassment had evolved into something far more significant, a crucible that would test not only his diplomatic skills, but also his understanding of both human and Klingon nature. With the eyes of the galaxy upon them, Scott Webb and Commander Craxon faced this new threat, their earlier antagonism forgotten in the face of a common enemy. The true test of their budding alliance was about to begin. As Captain Steele and his followers advanced, Scott's mind raced. He glanced at Commander Craxon, noting her tense posture and the way her hand hovered near her weapon. In that moment, their earlier conflict seemed trivial compared to the new threat before them. Admiral Hawkins stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Captain Steele, stand down immediately. This is a diplomatic zone, and your actions are in violation of multiple regulations." Steele sneered, his eyes wild with fervor. "Regulations? We're here to protect humanity's interests, not kowtow to alien demands." Before the situation could escalate further, General Kavah's commanding presence silenced the crowd. "Enough!" she roared, her voice echoing through the spaceport. "This display of human aggression will not be tolerated. Commander Craxon, secure these dissidents." Craxon moved swiftly, her security team fanning out to surround Steele and his followers. Scott, sensing an opportunity to diffuse the tension, stepped between the two groups. "Captain Steele," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him, "I understand your concerns, but this is not the way to address them. Let's talk about this calmly and rationally." For a moment, Steele's tenacity seemed to waver. Then his face hardened once more. "There's nothing to discuss with alien sympathizers," he spat. As Craxon's team moved in to apprehend the protesters, Scott caught the commander's eye. Something passed between them, a moment of understanding, of shared purpose. Despite their earlier misunderstanding, they now stood united against a common threat. In the aftermath of the incident, Scott found himself thrust into the spotlight. News outlets across the galaxy picked up the story, focusing on the unlikely alliance between the human diplomat and the Klingon commander. Footage of Scott standing alongside Craxon, presenting a united front against the protesters, went viral. Admiral Hawkins and General Kavah, recognizing the potential in this unexpected turn of events, convened an emergency meeting. Scott and Craxon were summoned to the Admiral's temporary office in the spaceport. "Mr. Webb, Commander Craxon," Admiral Hawkins began, his tone serious but with an undercurrent of excitement. "Your handling of today's events has presented us with a unique opportunity." General Kavah nodded in agreement. "The incident has sparked considerable interest in human-Klingon cooperation. We believe we can use this momentum to further our diplomatic efforts." Scott glanced at Craxon, noticing a flicker of intrigue in her eyes. "What did you have in mind, sir?" he asked. Admiral Hawkins leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "We're assigning you both to lead a joint cultural exchange program. Your first mission will be to establish the first human embassy on Kronos 2. Scott's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He turned to Craxon, gauging her reaction. The Klingon commander stood tall, her expression a mix of pride and persistence. "It would be an honor to serve the Empire in this capacity," Craxon said, her voice firm. "And for Earth as well," Scott added quickly, feeling a strange flutter in his chest at the prospect of working closely with Craxon. As they left the Admiral's office, Scott and Craxon found themselves walking side by side through the bustling spaceport. The air between them had changed, charged with a new energy of shared purpose and growing respect. "I must admit, Mr. Webb," Craxon said, breaking the silence, "I underestimated you earlier. Your actions during the protest were impressive." Scott felt a warmth spread through him at her words. "Thank you, Commander. I have to say, I'm looking forward to learning more about Klingon culture during our assignment." Craxon's lips curved into what Scott realized was a smile, a rare sight on a Klingon face. Perhaps you can teach me about human customs as well, starting with this anatomical difference that caused our initial misunderstanding. Scott laughed, feeling the last of the tension between them dissipate. I'd be happy to explain, Commander, though perhaps over a drink first? As they made their way to the spaceport's lounge, Scott couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. This assignment would be challenging, no doubt, but it also held the promise of something more, a chance to bridge the gap between their species in ways he had never imagined. Their conversation flowed easily as they discussed the upcoming mission, each offering insights into their respective cultures. Scott found himself fascinated by Craxon's descriptions of Klingon rituals and traditions, while she listened intently to his explanations of human social norms. However, their planning was interrupted by the arrival of senior diplomat Marcus Steele, his face a mask of barely held back anger. "Mr. Webb," he said, his voice dripping with disdain, "I need a word with you, in private." Scott exchanged a glance with Craxon before nodding. "Of course, Mr. Steele. Commander, if you'll excuse me for a moment." As Scott followed Steele to a quiet corner of the lounge, he couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation would be the first of many challenges he and Craxon would face in their new roles as ambassadors of peace between their species. The lounge's ambient noise faded as Steele turned to face Scott, his eyes blazing with barely held back fury. "Webb, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but this farce has gone on long enough. You're a liability to this mission and to Earth's interests." Scott stood his ground, meeting Steele's gaze unflinchingly. "With all due respect, Mr. Steele, Admiral Hawkins seems to disagree. The incident today has opened up new avenues for diplomacy that we can't afford to ignore." Steele's face reddened. "New avenues? You were nearly arrested for smuggling contraband, and now you're cozying up to the very Klingon who accused you. How can we trust you to represent humanity's interests?" "Because I'm willing to look past our differences and find common ground," Scott replied, his voice level but firm. "Isn't that what diplomacy is all about?" Before Steele could respond, a commotion near the lounge's entrance caught their attention. A group of reporters had gathered, their cameras trained on Craxon as she fielded questions about the day's events in the newly announced cultural exchange program. Steele's eyes narrowed as he watched the scene unfold. "This isn't over, Webb," he hissed before storming off, leaving Scott alone to contemplate the challenges that lay ahead. As Scott rejoined Craxon, he couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and trepidation. Their journey to Kronos Desiu would be fraught with obstacles, both personal and political. But as he met Craxon's gaze, he saw in her eyes a reflection of his own grit. Together, they would face whatever challenges awaited them, forging a new path of understanding between their people. The true test of their unlikely partnership was about to begin. Scott's mind raced as he and Craxon made their way to the ceremonial arena on Kronos 2. The past few months had been a whirlwind of intense training and cultural immersion, all leading up to this moment. As they approached the imposing structure, Scott felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The outcome of today's ritual combat would shape the future of human-Klingon relations. Craxon placed a hand on Scott's arm, her touch both reassuring and electrifying. "Remember your training, Webb. Kompek is a formidable warrior, but you have skills he won't expect." Scott nodded, grateful for her support. Their relationship had deepened during their time on Kronos 2, evolving into something neither of them had anticipated. But now wasn't the time to dwell on personal matters. The roar of the crowd grew louder as they entered the arena. The Klingon spectators filled the stands, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Scott spotted Admiral Hawkins and General Kavag in a raised box, their expressions tense. As he made his way to the center of the arena, he locked eyes with his opponent, Kompek. The Klingon warrior stood tall and proud, his muscular frame adorned with traditional battle armor. Kompek's eyes narrowed as he assessed Scott, clearly unimpressed by the human before him. A gong sounded, signaling the start of the combat. Kompek wasted no time, lunging forward with a series of powerful strikes. Scott's instincts kicked in, his body moving with a fluidity that surprised even himself. He ducked and weaved, narrowly avoiding Kompek's crushing blows. The crowd's cheers turned to murmurs of surprise as Scott held his ground. Compek pressed his attack, his face contorting with frustration as the human continued to evade him. Scott's mind raced, recalling Kraxon's lessons on Klingon combat techniques. Seeing an opening, Scott feinted to the left before striking Compek's right side, a move that combined human boxing with a Klingon grappling technique. The unexpected attack caught Compek off guard, causing him to stumble. The arena fell silent as the Klingons processed what they were witnessing. Scott pressed his advantage, unleashing a flurry of strikes that forced Compek onto the defensive. The Klingon warrior's eyes widened in disbelief as he found himself being pushed back by a human. As the fight wore on, Scott's unconventional style began to take its toll on Compek. The Klingon's movements became slower, his attacks more desperate. With a swift maneuver, Scott managed to knock Compek off balance, sending him crashing to the ground. The crowd held its breath as Scott stood over his fallen opponent. Klingon tradition demanded a final, lethal blow. But Scott had other ideas. He extended his hand to Compek, offering him a chance to yield. "You fought with honor," Scott said, his voice carrying across the silent arena. "There's no need for this to end in death." Compek stared at Scott's outstretched hand, conflict evident in his eyes. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, with a grunt of reluctant respect, Compek clasped Scott's arm and allowed himself to be helped to his feet. "I yield," Compek announced, his voice a mix of resignation and admiration. The arena erupted in a cacophony of cheers and confused shouts. Scott caught sight of Kraxon, her face beaming with pride. Admiral Hawkins and General Kava exchanged meaningful glances, clearly recognizing the significance of what had just transpired. As Scott and Compek made their way out of the arena, they were swarmed by officials and reporters. Compek raised his hand for silence. "Today I have witnessed the true spirit of a warrior in this human," Compek declared. "Scott Webb has proven himself worthy of our respect and alliance. I pledge my support to the Human-Klingon Alliance and call on my fellow Klingons to do the same." The impact of Compek's words was immediate. Klingons who had been skeptical of human involvement on Konos Twix now looked at Scott with newfound respect. Admiral Hawkins seized the moment, stepping forward to address the crowd. "In light of today's events, we are pleased to announce an expansion of our cultural exchange program," Hawkins proclaimed. "We will be launching a joint human-Klingon space exploration mission aimed at discovering new resources and potential colony worlds for both our species." General Kava joined Hawkins, adding, "This mission will be led by the two individuals who have done so much to bring our people together, Scott Webb and Commander Kraxon." Scott's eyes widened at the announcement. He turned to Kraxon, seeing his own mix of surprise and excitement mirrored in her expression. As they stood side by side, accepting congratulations from those around them, Scott couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation for what lay ahead. However, amidst the celebration, Scott noticed senior diplomat Marcus Steele watching from the shadows, his face a mask of barely suppressed anger. It was clear that not everyone was pleased with this turn of events. As the crowd began to disperse, Kraxon pulled Scott aside. "We have much to discuss, Webb," she said, her voice low. "This mission and us." Scott nodded, acutely aware of the complexities that lay before them. Their growing closeness had not gone unnoticed, and he knew it would raise questions on both sides. But before he could respond, a commotion near the arena entrance caught their attention. A group of humans pushed their way through the crowd, their faces set with iron will. Scott recognized their leader, Captain Marcus Steele, the face of the Earth First movement. As Steele's eyes locked onto Scott and Kraxon, a chill ran down Scott's spine. He realized that the challenges they faced were just getting started, and the true test of their alliance was yet to come. Scott's eyes narrowed as he watched Captain Marcus Steele and his group push through the crowd. The tension in the air was palpable, and he could feel Kraxon stiffen beside him. "We need to keep an eye on them," Scott muttered, his voice low. "Something's not right." Kraxon nodded, her hand instinctively moving to the disruptor at her hip. "Agreed. Let's inform Admiral Hawkins and General Kava." As they made their way through the dispersing crowd, Scott couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The peace conference was fast approaching, and the Earth First Movement's presence on Konos de Basuna was a powder keg waiting to explode. Over the next few weeks, Scott and Craxton threw themselves into their investigation. They pored over personnel files, monitored communications, and conducted discreet interviews with the human contingent on the planet. Their efforts paid off when they stumbled upon a hidden cache of weapons in the human embassy. "This confirms our suspicions," Craxton said, her voice grim as she examined the arsenal. "They're planning an attack on the conference." Scott nodded, his mind racing. "We need to present this to Admiral Hawkins and General Kava immediately." The meeting with the top brass was tense. Admiral Hawkins paced the room as Scott and Craxton laid out their findings. "This is most disturbing," General Kava growled, his fist clenching on the table. "We must increase security measures at once." Admiral Hawkins nodded in agreement. "I'll put our best people on it. Webb, Craxton, I want you two to continue your investigation. Find out who else is involved and how they plan to strike." As they left the meeting, Scott couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. Despite their best efforts, something told him that Steele and his team were always one step ahead. The day of the peace conference arrived with a mix of anticipation and tension. Scott stood at the entrance of the venue, his eyes scanning the crowd of delegates and security personnel. Craxton approached, her face set in a determined expression. "All security checkpoints are in place," she reported. "We've triple-checked every delegate and staff member." Scott nodded, but before he could respond, a series of loud pops echoed through the building, followed by the flickering and dying of lights. The sudden darkness was accompanied by a chorus of confused shouts and the sound of shattering glass. "EMP devices!" Scott yelled, grabbing Craxton's arm. "They've knocked out the security systems." As if on cue, the unmistakable sound of weapons fire erupted from the main conference hall. Scott and Craxton sprinted towards the chaos, their training kicking in as they assessed the situation. The scene that greeted them was one of utter bedlam. Earth First operatives, disguised as maintenance workers, had revealed themselves and were now targeting key Klingon leaders. Delegates scrambled for cover as security forces struggled to respond in the darkness. "We need to evacuate the delegates," Craxton shouted over the din. "I'll take point." Scott nodded, falling in behind her as they began to usher panicked diplomats towards the emergency exits. As they worked, Scott caught sight of a familiar face in the chaos, Captain Marcus Steele, directing his operatives with cold efficiency. Their eyes met across the room, and Scott saw the flicker of recognition in Steele's gaze. Without hesitation, Steele charged towards him, abandoning his position to engage in close combat. "Webb!" Steele snarled as he closed the distance. "You're a traitor to your own species." Scott barely had time to brace himself before Steele's fist connected with his jaw. The force of the blow sent him staggering, but years of training kicked in. He recovered quickly, dropping into a defensive stance. "You're the traitor, Steele," Scott shot back, dodging another punch. "You're willing to throw away peace for your own twisted ideology." Their fight intensified, a brutal dance of punches, kicks, and grapples. Steele's military training was evident in every move, but Scott's recent immersion in Klingon combat techniques allowed him to hold his own. As they struggled, Steele's face contorted with a mix of rage and desperation. "You don't understand," he spat. "These aliens will destroy everything that makes us human. Our culture, our identity, all of it will be lost." Scott ducked under a wild swing, countering with a Klingon grappling move that sent Steele stumbling. "You're wrong," Scott panted. "We can learn from each other, grow stronger together." Their fight raged on, mirroring the larger battle around them. In the periphery of his vision, Scott saw Craxton leading a group of Klingon warriors, her voice ringing out with clear commands as they secured the perimeter. Suddenly, a familiar roar cut through the chaos. Scott turned to see Kompek charging into the fray, leading a contingent of Klingon reinforcements. The tide of the battle shifted instantly, with the Earth First operatives finding themselves outmatched and outgunned. Taking advantage of Scott's momentary distraction, Steele landed a powerful blow to his solar plexus. Scott doubled over, gasping for air, but managed to sweep Steele's legs out from under him. They both crashed to the ground, grappling for dominance. As they rolled across the floor, Scott caught glimpses of the battle turning in their favor. Admiral Hawkins and General Kava had restored communications and were coordinating a joint human-Klingon response. The sight of the two leaders working together, even in the midst of chaos, filled Scott with a renewed sense of purpose. With a surge of strength, Scott managed to pin Steele to the ground. "It's over," he growled, his forearm pressed against Steele's throat. "Your plot has failed." Steele's eyes burned with hatred, but Scott saw something else there too. Fear. Fear of change, fear of the unknown. As security forces approached to take Steele into custody, Scott felt a mix of relief and sadness. The battle was won, but the war against fear and prejudice was just the beginning. As the last of the Earth First operatives were rounded up, Scott found Craxton in the crowd. Their eyes met, and in that moment, they both knew that everything had changed. Their actions had not only saved the peace conference, but had also become a powerful symbol of what humans and Klingons could achieve together. The aftermath of the attack buzzed with activity. Medical teams tended to the injured, security forces secured the area, and shell-shocked delegates huddled in small groups, processing what had just occurred. In the midst of it all, Scott and Craxton stood side by side, their proximity drawing curious glances from humans and Klingons alike. Admiral Hawkins approached them, his uniform disheveled but his eyes bright with purpose. "Webb, Craxton," he said, his voice carrying a note of pride. "Your actions today have saved more than just lives. You've given us a chance to redefine the future of human-Klingon relations." As the Admiral spoke, Scott couldn't help but feel the weight of what lay ahead. The foiled attack had opened a door, but it was up to them to step through it. He glanced at Craxton, seeing his own mix of exhaustion and willpower mirrored in her eyes. Whatever challenges awaited them, he knew they would face them together. Together. In the days following the attack, Scott and Craxton found themselves thrust into the center of a diplomatic whirlwind. The thwarted assassination attempt had become a catalyst for change, accelerating the plans for the joint human-Klingon space exploration mission. Admiral Hawkins called them into his office, his face set with dedication. "Webb, Craxton, your actions during the conference have proven something I've long suspected, that humans and Klingons can work together effectively, perhaps even better than we do separately." General Kavag nodded in agreement, his usually stern features softened by a hint of approval. "Your partnership has shown great promise. It is for this reason that we have decided to appoint you both as co-commanders of Operation Horizon." Scott blinked in surprise, glancing at Craxton, who looked equally taken aback. "Sir, we're honored, but—" "This isn't a request, Webb," Hawkins interrupted. "It's an order. The USS Unity needs leaders who understand both cultures and can bridge the gap between our species." As they left the office, Scott's mind raced with the implications of their new assignment. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the potential for furthering human-Klingon relations. Craxton broke the silence as they walked. "This will not be an easy task, Webb. Our crew will be watching our every move, judging how we interact." Scott nodded, acutely aware of the challenges that lay ahead. "We'll need to present a united front, show them that cooperation isn't just possible, it's essential." The following weeks were a blur of activity as they prepared for the mission. The USS Unity, a marvel of joint engineering, stood in dry dock, its sleek lines a testament to what their species could achieve together. As Scott oversaw the loading of supplies, a familiar voice called out to him. He turned to see Dr. Elena Petrova approaching, her face etched with concern. "Commander Webb, I need to speak with you urgently," she said, her voice low. "It's about the mission." Scott led her to a quiet corner of the docking bay. "What is it, Doctor?" Petrova's eyes darted around before she spoke. "My latest research has uncovered a potential problem. Prolonged exposure between humans and Klingons in confined spaces might lead to unforeseen biological interactions. We don't know the full extent of the risks." Scott felt a chill run down his spine. "How serious is this, Doctor?" "Potentially very serious," she replied. "But I need more time to study the effects. For now, I can develop some safety protocols to minimize the risk." Scott's mind raced with the implications. If word of this got out, it could derail the entire mission and set back human-Klingon relations by years. He made a quick decision. Keep this between us for now, Doctor. Work on those safety measures. I'll inform Craxon, but we can't risk causing panic among the crew. As launch day approached, the weight of this secret pressed heavily on Scott. He and Craxon worked tirelessly to implement Petrova's recommendations without raising suspicion, but the strain was beginning to show in their interactions. The morning of the launch dawned clear and bright. As Scott and Craxon made their final inspections of the Unity, a commotion at the perimeter caught their attention. A group of protesters, both human and Klingon, had broken through the security cordon and were charging towards the ship. Without hesitation, Scott and Craxon sprang into action. "Security teams, converge on the south entrance," Scott barked into his communicator. Craxon was already moving, her disruptor drawn. "Webb, take the left flank. We'll cut them off before they reach the ship." Their coordinated response was a sight to behold. Human and Klingon security forces, following their leader's example, worked in tandem to neutralize the threat. Scott and Craxon moved as one, covering each other's blind spots and anticipating each other's moves. In a matter of minutes, the situation was under control. As the last of the protesters were led away, Scott caught Craxon's eye. There was a newfound respect in her gaze, a silent acknowledgement of their effectiveness as a team. The incident had an unexpected effect on the crew. As they boarded the ship, there was a palpable sense of unity, forged in the face of adversity. As the final preparations were made, Scott addressed the assembled crew on the bridge. "What we witnessed today is just a taste of the challenges we'll face out there. But we also saw what we can achieve when we work together. Human or Klingon, we're all part of the Unity now." Craxon stepped forward, her voice ringing with authority. "Let our actions today serve as a model for our mission. Together, we will forge a new path among the stars." With a nod to the helmsman, Scott gave the order. "Take us out." The USS Unity lifted off smoothly, leaving the atmosphere of Konos 2 behind. As the ship broke free of the planet's gravity well, Scott felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. They were embarking on a journey into the unknown, not just in terms of space exploration, but in the realm of interspecies cooperation. Little did they know that their first test lay just ahead, hidden in the uncharted depths of space. As the Unity cruised at warp speed, the sensors began to pick up anomalous readings. "Commanders," the Klingon science officer called out, "I'm detecting a dense asteroid field directly in our path. Our current trajectory will take us straight through it." Scott and Craxon exchanged glances. This was the moment they had prepared for, the first real challenge to their joint leadership. As they approached the asteroid field, they could see the tension rising among the crew. It was time to make a decision that would set the course for their entire mission. As the Unity cruised through space, Scott and Craxon stood side by side on the bridge, their eyes fixed on the console. The asteroid field loomed before them, a chaotic dance of rocks and debris spanning light years. "Helm, adjust course to Vector 227 Mark IV, Scott ordered, his voice steady despite the tension in his shoulders. "We'll skirt the edge of the field." Craxon nodded in agreement. "Tactical, raise shields and prepare evasive maneuvers. We cannot afford to underestimate the dangers that lurk within." The crew worked in perfect synchronization, human and Klingon hands moving across consoles with practiced efficiency. As the Unity changed course, the asteroid field filled the view screen, a testament to the vastness and unpredictability of space. Suddenly, the ship shuddered, rocked by an unexpected impact. "Report!" Scott barked, gripping the arm of his chair. "Unknown energy signature detected within the asteroid field, Commander," the science officer announced, her voice tinged with excitement and apprehension. "It appears to be emanating from a small planetoid at coordinates 329 Mark 7. Craxon leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "On screen." The view screen shifted, revealing a nondescript celestial body nestled among the asteroids. Its surface appeared barren and lifeless, but the energy readings told a different story. Scott and Craxon exchanged a glance, years of shared experience allowing them to communicate without words. "Helm, set a course for the planetoid, Scott ordered. Let's see what we've stumbled upon. As the Unity approached the mysterious world, the sensors began to paint a clearer picture. Beneath the planetoid's unremarkable exterior lay a complex network of structures, hidden from casual observation, but unmistakably artificial. Incredible, Scott breathed, leaning closer to the sensor readouts. These structures predate both human and Klingon civilizations by millions of years. Craxon's eyes gleamed with the thrill of discovery. An ancient alien outpost, long abandoned. The glory of its discovery shall be shared by both our peoples. Scott nodded, already formulating a plan. Agreed. We'll lead an away team to investigate. Have Dr. Petrova prepare containment protocols. We don't know what we might encounter down there. Within the hour, Scott and Craxon materialized on the planetoid's surface with a carefully selected team of human and Klingon specialists. The barren landscape belied the technological marvels that lay beneath their feet. This way, Craxon indicated, her tricorder beeping insistently. The energy signature is strongest in this direction. They made their way across the rocky terrain, each step bringing them closer to the hidden entrance of the alien facility. As they approached a sheer cliff face, Scott's hand brushed against an invisible barrier. The air shimmered, and a doorway materialized before them, its design unlike anything they had ever seen. Fascinating, Scott murmured, running his fingers along the smooth, otherworldly surface. The entire facility must be shielded from detection. With a shared nod of perseverance, Scott and Craxon led their team into the ancient outpost. The interior was a maze of corridors and chambers, each filled with technology so advanced it bordered on the incomprehensible. Holographic displays flickered to life as they passed, showing star charts of unfamiliar galaxies and diagrams of impossible machines. In the heart of the facility, they found the source of the energy readings, a pulsing core of pure energy contained within a series of interlocking fields. Its power output dwarfed anything in the combined arsenals of Earth and Kronos. This energy source, Craxon breathed, her voice filled with awe. It could revolutionize our propulsion systems. Imagine the possibilities for exploration, for expansion. Scott nodded, his mind racing with the implications. We need to study this carefully. The potential is enormous, but so are the risks. As the away team began their analysis of the alien technology, Scott's communicator chirped urgently. Commander Webb, this is the Unity. We've detected an unknown vessel on an intercept course. They're not responding to hails. Scott and Craxon locked eyes, the excitement of discovery instantly replaced by the gravity of potential danger. Understood, Unity. Prepare for emergency beam out on my signal. Craxon barked orders in Klingon, directing her team to secure as much data as possible. We cannot leave empty-handed, she growled. The glory of this discovery must not be lost. Scott nodded in agreement, his own team working feverishly to download schematics and energy readings. We'll take what we can, but we need to move fast. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble as the unknown ship entered orbit, its scans penetrating deep into the planetoid's core. Dust and debris rained down from the ancient ceiling, the facility groaning under the strain. That's it, we're out of time, Scott shouted over the increasing rumble. Everyone, prepare for emergency evacuation. As the team scrambled to gather their findings, a violent tremor shook the outpost. A section of the ceiling collapsed, cutting off their escape route and trapping several crew members beneath the rubble. Without hesitation, Scott and Craxon sprang into action. Webb, secure that energy core, Craxon ordered, already moving towards the trapped crew. I'll free our warriors. Scott nodded, trusting his co-commander implicitly. He directed his team to carefully disconnect a portion of the alien power source, hoping it would be enough to study without destabilizing the entire system. Craxon, meanwhile, demonstrated her legendary Klingon strength, lifting massive chunks of debris to free the trapped crew members. Human and Klingon alike worked side by side, their differences forgotten in the face of shared danger. As the last of the injured were pulled to safety, Scott's communicator crackled to life. Commander, the unknown vessel has opened fire on the planetoid. We're detecting massive energy fluctuations. You need to get out of there now. Understood, Unity, Scott replied, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Energize. The familiar tingle of the transporter beam enveloped them, just as another violent tremor rocked the facility. They materialized on the Unity's transporter pad in a flash of light, the precious alien artifacts clutched tightly in their hands. On the bridge, Scott and Craxton watched in stunned silence as the planetoid erupted in a massive explosion, the ancient outpost disappearing in a blinding flash of energy. The shockwave slammed into the Unity, sending the ship tumbling through space. Report, Scott called out, steadying himself against his command chair. Propulsion systems are offline, the helmsman reported, his fingers flying over the controls. We're dead in the water. Craxton's eyes narrowed as she studied the tactical display. The unknown vessel is closing in. We must act quickly, or we will become prey to these patak. Scott's mind raced, considering their options. The alien technology they had salvaged from the outpost might be their only chance. It was a risk, but one they had to take. Engineering, he called out, his voice filled with purpose. Prepare to integrate the alien power source into our systems. It's time to see what this technology can really do. As the engineering team scrambled to comply, Scott and Craxton shared a look of persistence. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, united in their mission to forge a new future for both their peoples. The unknown vessel loomed ever closer on the display, its intentions as mysterious as its origins. Scott and Craxton stood at the ready, prepared to make the difficult decisions that would determine the fate of their crew and their mission. The true test of their leadership and the strength of the human-Klingon alliance was about to begin. Scott and Craxton shared a determined look as they made their decision. Engineering, integrate the alien power source into our systems, Scott commanded. Let's see what this technology can do. The tension on the bridge was palpable as the engineering team worked feverishly to connect the salvaged alien artifact to the Unity's propulsion systems. Warning klaxons blared as the unknown vessel closed in, its intentions still a mystery. Integration complete, the chief engineer's voice crackled over the comm. But sir, I must warn you, we have no idea how this will affect our systems. Scott nodded grimly. Understood, we're out of options. Helm, activate the experimental drive on my mark. Craxton gripped the chair of her chair, her squeezing hard. Whatever happens, we face it together. Mark! The Unity shuddered violently as the alien technology surged to life. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed the ship might tear itself apart. Sparks flew from consoles and crew members were thrown from their stations. Scott gritted his teeth, silently willing the ship to hold together. Suddenly, the violent shaking ceased, replaced by an eerie calm. Through the view screen, they watched in awe as stars began to streak past at velocities they'd never experienced before. The pursuing alien ship vanished from their sensors, left far behind in the blink of an eye. Incredible, Scott breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. Helm, what's our speed? The helmsman shook his head in disbelief. Sir, we're moving faster than our instruments can measure. We've already crossed several sectors. Craxton leaned forward, her expression a mix of excitement and concern. We've left known space entirely. We must be cautious. Scott nodded in agreement. Helm, drop us out of this experimental faster-than-light travel. Let's get our bearings. As the Unity decelerated, the stars on the display returned to their familiar pinprick appearance. The ship emerged into normal space, surrounded by unfamiliar constellations. Damage report, Scott called out, surveying the bridge. Consoles flickered, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of burned circuitry. Multiple systems are offline, the operations officer reported. Warp drive, long-range communications, and weapons are all down. We're operating on emergency power. Craxton stood, her warrior's instincts kicking in. I'll oversee the repairs. We must get our defenses back online in case that ship or others find us. As Craxton left to coordinate the repair efforts, Scott turned his attention to the data they'd managed to salvage from the ancient outpost. He pored over the information, his brow furrowed in concentration. Hours passed as the crew worked tirelessly to restore the Unity systems. Scott's eyes widened as he made a startling discovery in the alien data. He quickly summoned Craxon back to the bridge. "Look at this," he said, gesturing to the display. "The energy source we found isn't just a random artifact. It's part of a vast network spread across the galaxy." Craxon studied the information, her eyes narrowing. "A network of faster-than-light travel points?" Scott nodded. "Exactly. And if I'm interpreting this correctly, we've only scratched the surface of its capabilities." Their discussion was interrupted by an alert from the science station. "Commanders, long-range sensors are back online. We've detected a massive structure approximately 2 light-years from our position." The view screen flickered to life, revealing a colossal space station suspended against the backdrop of an unfamiliar nebula. Its design was unlike anything they'd ever seen, with graceful spiraling arms and pulsing energy conduits. "It's emitting the same energy signature as the planetoid facility," the science officer reported, "and the pursuing ship." Scott and Craxon exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them. This could be their chance to make first contact, to potentially gain allies in this uncharted region of space, but it could also be walking into another trap. "Helm, set a course for the station," Scott ordered, "but keep us at a safe distance. We'll approach cautiously." As the Unity drew closer to the massive structure, the crew watched with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The station dwarfed their ship, its size becoming more apparent with each passing moment. Suddenly, a shimmering hologram materialized on the bridge. The ethereal figure was tall and slender, with features that seemed to shift and change as they watched. When it spoke, its voice resonated with an otherworldly timbre. "Greetings, travelers. I am a guardian, one of the ancient race tasked with protecting the galactic network of faster-than-light technology. Your presence here is unexpected, but not unwelcome." Scott stepped forward, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. "I am Commander Scott Webb of the USS Unity. We come in peace and seek to understand." The Guardian's form rippled, as if considering their words. "Your ship bears the marks of our technology. You have activated one of our nodes, a feat not easily accomplished. Yet you removed components from a protected facility, triggering our automated defense systems." Craxon joined Scott, her posture proud but non-threatening. "We did not understand the significance of what we found. We seek knowledge, not conflict." The Guardian's form solidified, becoming more defined. "Your actions, while unintended, have brought you to a crossroads. You now stand at the threshold of a larger universe, one filled with wonders and dangers beyond your current understanding." The hologram gestured, and a shimmering projection of the galaxy appeared, crisscrossed with lines of energy, the vast network they had stumbled upon. "You face a choice," the Guardian continued. "We can erase your memories of this encounter and return you to your own space. Or you can accept the responsibility of becoming the newest members of our galactic community, tasked with helping to maintain this network and foster cooperation among species." Scott and Craxon didn't hesitate. They turned to each other, their decision made in a single shared glance. Scott spoke for them both, his voice filled with conviction. "We accept the responsibility. On behalf of humans and Klingons, we're ready to join this larger community." The Guardian's form pulsed with what might have been approval. "Then let your journey truly begin. Dock with our station, and we shall guide you in the ways of the network. Your unity of different species will serve you well in the tasks ahead." As the hologram faded, Scott and Craxon stood side by side on the bridge, the enormity of their decision sinking in. They had just altered the course of history for both their peoples, opening the door to a new era of exploration and cooperation. The Unity moved slowly towards the massive docking port of the Guardian station, its crew united in purpose and filled with a mix of excitement and trepidation. As the airlock sealed and the docking clamps engaged, Scott and Craxon shared a moment of silent understanding. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as representatives of a new alliance in a vast and wondrous galaxy.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.